Mom fell down because Dad shot her. Well, that way Piotrush also signed his own death warrant. Hi, welcome to another episode of Criminalny Patrol. Today, we have a story that's not very well known, which basically took place in a very small town far from the main transit routes in Wawrzynczyce. It's a town about 30 kilometers from Krakow, rather off the beaten path. Not much usually happens there, but as it turns out, it also has its own macabre story. I invite you to watch the next episode.
We warmly welcome the new supporters of our channel, Dorota Pospieszalska, Maciej Nowicki, and Jakub. They continue to support us at the highest levels. Mona Monika, Anna Maria KRK, Kinga Struska, Wira, Dorota Kowalówka, Dawid Grobecki, Bartosz Zięciak, and Jarosław Jarociński. It's thanks to your support that we can make new films. If you want to join our group of patrons, support us by clicking the link in the description below the video.
The Jakubowski family has always lived in this village. They farmed, they lived here. Of course, everyone knew them, as is typical in such a small town, in a small village. A family that had several children. Until 1945, well, they somehow managed to make ends meet. They were doing fairly well, but in 1945, their daughter, Michalina, moved back in with them, along with her husband, Jan. And their 3 children. Well, that's when, as they used to say, there were new mouths to feed. Poverty was coming at them from all sides. There was no other way. Jan decided to try. Michalina's husband decided to try his luck in the recovered territories. He said he would go, as the authorities at the time used to say. There were farms there, of course, former German farms which you could enter at any time. There were houses, barns, horses, cows, and farm machinery. Everything that is needed to live happily and run a farm. That's exactly what Jan thought. At first he convinced, or rather made an agreement with his mother, 50-year-old Maria, and they decided to go to the recovered territories. Jan's mother, Michalina's mother-in-law, well, during the war she was involved in trade. She was sharp, as they used to say. She traded in clothes, moonshine, and meat. Well, anything she could get her hands on and anything she could make money from, and she sold all her belongings for it. The money she had, she wrapped up in some stocking, and together with Jan, who was 27 years old at the time, they went to the recovered territories. And Jan, when he lived in Wawrzynczyce, was a bit of a terror in the village. He was quick to get into fights. People were simply afraid of him. But since he drank vodka and more often moonshine with everyone, everyone also considered him one of their own. He also had a weapon. No one really knew what exactly he did during the war. But during the war, he was doing pretty well. Sometime at the end of October 1945, Jan, together with his mother Maria, went to the recovered territories looking for a new life. But then it turned out that only 3 weeks had passed. Jan returns back to Wawrzynczyce. When asked where his mother is, he says that his mother has found herself a new, better life. He actually had a fight with his mother. That's why he came back. When he returned, he started drinking moonshine and also buying drinks for his friends. They wondered a bit where he got the money from. But in the end, he was one of them, as I said before, so basically everyone drank. Jan drank, his friends drank, it didn't bother anyone. Somewhere at the beginning of 1946, it was spring, Jan decided to get some work. He went to Chorzów then. He got a job at the battery steelworks and started working there. Well, as it is in such a town, different people worked there too. Someone told Michalina, Jan's wife, that Jan had found himself some woman there in Chorzów and that he was living with her. so Michalina went after him. And indeed, after a few days, she brought her husband Jan back to Łazienczyce. Well, people were surprised, some even laughed a bit. Well, because he was such a smart guy, such an aggressor, and his wife literally dragged him home by the ears to such a quiet place. Well, but of course there was still poverty at home. There were quite a few people in that house. So Jan decided, or at least that's what he told the family, that he would go to the recovered territories after all, that he would try a second time. Even near Jelenia Gora, he had his eye on a farm that he had seen before. Well, everything is there, cows, horses and all. Well, you just go into that house, onto that farm and live there. Just go into that house, take his wife Michalina, and they would go together and live there just like that. That's exactly what happened. When the Jakubowski family was leaving, they sold a calf. With that money, they bought them some bedding and clothes. They bought them pots. Well, they basically outfitted them. And the family went to the recovered territories. There was Michalina and there was Jan. There were also two of their sons, 7-year-old Dionysi and 5-year-old Piotrush. They also had a daughter, little Marija, who was only 2 years old at the time. But the mother-in-law said they should just leave her, that the little one simply wouldn't survive such a journey, that she's sickly, and it's better for her to stay at home. Once they settle down somehow in the recovered territories, then they'll take the little one with them, and that's exactly what happened. The family left for the recovered territories sometime in July of 1946. But only a month passes since they left. It's around the end of August 1946. Jan comes back to the village. He returns to his in-laws. And he tells them that indeed in Jelenia Gora they have a farm, that the farm is very well equipped. That, well, they found a new life there, that they're living very well there. And he wants to take little Maria. Though she was 2 years old, but the mother-in-law says again, no, that Marisha is sick, that she's not fit for such a journey. And besides, how is a man supposed to take care of such a small child? She put her foot down and Jan didn't take the child. He said that once they get settled, then he'll come for them, and then he'll also take the in-laws to Jelenia Gora, and they'll all live together there. That's what he did. He went and left his 2-year-old daughter with the in-laws. Well, more weeks went by. Nothing was happening. Jan neither came nor wrote. He did leave an address in Jelenia Gora, though, and Jakubowski wrote a letter to that address. However, after a few weeks, the letter came back with a note saying that the addressee was simply unknown. They were a bit surprised, and Jakubowski also felt a bit sad that those people had left. They had a great farm somewhere there in Jelenia Gora, and they were supposed to send for them, but there was only silence. Well, they were a bit resentful because they thought, they've settled in, they're better off now. So now they just don't care about us anymore. Around the same time, that is July, the end of July 1946, by the Buber River under some rocks, they found a body. The body of a little boy. They searched the body but didn't find any documents. The people, the locals, said that, well, he had to be buried somehow. They really did bury the boy in the local cemetery. They didn't write anything because they simply didn't know anything about the boy. They wrote, as is customary to this day, NN, which means unknown. And around the same time, in Koszczynów, which is a town near Milic in Lower Silesia, in one of the houses, it was a house that had belonged to Germans. In the basement, the body of a woman was found. She also didn't have any documents on her. She was buried in the park, right there in Koszczynów. It was assumed that she was Polish, and someone simply wrote with wire on the wooden cross that was placed on her grave, "Here lies a Polish woman." They didn't know anything else. They wrote only as much as they simply could and in the way they thought was true. They thought she was Polish, although she didn't have any documents with her. Well, those were also times when people were dying. Some died on the way, others were attacked. Still others, well, shared the same fate somewhere in this way. Piotr, it's been almost a year. It's already June 1947. The children from Wałęszyce went on a trip to Krakow. The situation is not bad. Very good. This is good. Good. Did they go by bus? When they were coming back, they saw that there was a lady sitting on the bus whom they didn't know. It was some strange woman sitting on the bus. That woman asked the children if they knew the Jakubowski family. Well, of course the children knew the Jakubowskis. Then that woman told them to run to the Jakubowskis. And they told them that their son-in-law John had killed his mother, killed his wife and 2 children. The children on the bus were of course terrified, but they ran straight to the Jakubowskis. They ran into the yard and they started shouting all of this. The Jakubowskis heard them. They were terrified because they really had no contact with their family. They didn't know what was going on. The letters they wrote kept coming back with a note saying the recipient was unknown. They started asking the children, who was that woman? What did she look like? What did she say? Do they know any other details? But the children couldn't say anything except that she was riding on the bus. That it was a woman they didn't know, and that she told them to tell everything. The Jakubowski family is trying to find Michalina's mother somehow. Mrs. Jakubowska is going with one of her sons to Jelenia Góra. She goes there to the office that handled residence registration, as it was called back then. They tried to find that surname, but the surname wasn't anywhere in the records. They go to the address that Jan left them. It turns out that such a farm doesn't exist, that the address is simply not real. They return back to their place in Wałęszyce. They don't know whether what the woman said is actually true or not. But the fact is they have no contact with the family. They go to the police. Back then, the police were focused on consolidating communist rule, not on dealing with people traveling within Poland. Many people did that anyway. Many people were moving to the recovered territories, so found, na ziemię odzyskane. Again, it was impossible. No one in Poland was dealing with this. More and more time passed. There were no... Mijały kolejne lata. Everyone was expected to change. It's 1953, so it's been 7 years since then. 1953. The year, so as you can see, it's been practically 7 years since the disappearance. And then the militia starts to take action and begins to wonder what really could have happened to this family. The officers mainly determine which unit will be handling this case. Well, they decide that Wrocław will handle it because theoretically that's where the disappearance took place. That's one thing. Secondly, they start checking with the main registration office to see if he is registered anywhere in Poland. Jan, Michalina, Jan's mother, that is Maria, and 2 sons, Dionysi and Piotr. And it turns out that all these people simply don't exist. They're not listed at any address anywhere. They also check in schools to see if Dionysi and Piotr attended any school. And again, it turns out that they weren't enrolled in any school in Poland. They also start looking for John, and a lead emerges. It turns out that Jan was issued an ID card in Jaruf. They even send a telegram to the police officers in Jaruf to have him questioned. And they actually do it. They ask him about where his family is. The police officers handling the case, mainly from Wrocław, also go to Jarów, and that's when it turns out that Jan has disappeared. No, he disappeared right after that interrogation and the question about where his family was. But they also find out two things. The first is that Jan is also using another fake ID card. And secondly, that Jan has a lover in Jarów with whom he is probably still in contact. Since that's the case, they decided to set up an ambush and wait for Jan. Jan did in fact show up at his lover's place. That's when he was apprehended. The officers ask him about his family. At first he remains silent. He even admits that he did in fact obtain an ID card. He must have stolen it somewhere. He pasted his own photo into that ID card, but he stays silent about his family. Finally, after some time, he starts saying that his family is dead. But it happened in this way, that sometime in the summer of 1946, they all decided to escape to Germany. That in the forest they made a makeshift raft. They all got on that raft. His mother, Maria, who had joined them, was also with them. And they decided to use that raft to get to Germany. While they were sailing, the raft tipped over. They all fell into the water. Only Jan seemed to have survived. The rest of his family simply drowned. Of course, it was possible, even likely. In fact, quite a few people tried to escape from Poland this way. But the police officers didn't really believe any of it. But they had no evidence to prove otherwise. But they kept digging into the matter anyway. They went to the Battery Steelworks. Remember, he worked there for a while. And there they saw in his employment record, in the documents he filled out when he was hired, the question about his mother. He wrote then that his mother was dead. And only later did he state that his mother drowned at the end of July, or in July 1946. Well, it was obvious that he was simply lying, that in all of this he couldn't have written that his mother was dead if she was supposed to drown only a few months later. And here the police officers had clear evidence that Jan was simply lying and not telling the truth about what happened to his family. The police officers detained Jan again. Well, this time the interrogation is really serious, if I can use that word. But also during this interrogation, the police officer puts on the desk in front of him the documents he filled out in 1946. In April, when he wrote that his mother was dead, it seems that he broke down in some way at that time, and he decided to tell how it all happened. Well, he started by saying that indeed sometime around November of 1945 he arrived in Kosinowo with his mother. He didn't know it was Kosinowo, but he knew it was somewhere near Milic in Lower Silesia. There they found a house that had belonged to Germans. They decided to spend the winter in it. But one day, as he said, he simply had an argument with his mother. He pulled out a pistol. He had always had a weapon. And he shot his mother. He killed his mother. Then he wrapped the body in a comforter. He carried it to the basement, and there he covered it with a pile of potatoes. Then, you remember I mentioned that a body was found in that house. On his mother's grave, it was written that a Polish woman lies here. Well, it turned out that it was Jan's mother. He also said that when he returned to Warzęcice at some point, probably while drunk, he told Michalina, his wife. Basically, he shouted at her that if things kept going this way, he would do to her the same thing he did to his mother. In other words, he would just kill her. That's when Michalina, his wife, found out that he had killed his mother. So when she went to see him at the battery steelworks, at the time when he had found himself a lover, well, she simply had something to hold over him. And that's why he so meekly returned to Warzeńczyce. It's like he was planning it the whole time. Well, he knew that Michalina knew about it. She had something on him. At any moment, she could report the affair. So he decided to kill her. He also staged everything. He somehow staged the whole family's departure. He said he found a farm in Jelenia Gora. There was no such farm at all. He had never been there before. In fact, they got off the train in Jelenia Gora. They were in the city in the evening when they were waiting somewhere near the station. Michalina was there and there were two sons. He told them that they were waiting because transport would come for them soon. In reality, there was no transport at all. He was already constantly scheming how to kill his wife. And at some point, when it was already getting dark, he told them there's no other choice, there's no transport. We're going on foot. And indeed, they walked through the city and entered the forest. They passed the city and entered the forest. It looked like this. Michalina was walking in front. She was leading both of her sons, Dionysi and Piotr, by the hand. Jan stays behind. At some point he pulled out a weapon, he pulled out a pistol. He approached his wife and shot her in the back. The shot hit her roughly at heart level and the woman fell. She was dead. The children started crying, so he took them back to the city and walked with them. At some point, wanting to check if the children even knew what had happened, he asked Dionysi. Well, Dionysi was already 7 years old at that time, so he was already a grown boy, especially since he was raised during wartime. He asked Dionysi if he knew what had happened to Mommy. Dionysi said that he knew, that Daddy had shot Mommy. No, in this way the boy, Jan's son, signed his own death warrant. Jan, still with the children, with the boys, went towards the viaduct. There he told the younger one, Piotrush, to lie down on the hay. He walked Dionysi several dozen meters into the forest and shot him in the back at the level of his heart. That's how he killed his son. Remember, I mentioned that an unnamed boy was found under a pile of stones, because Jan really did hide the body under a pile of stones. He was buried in the local cemetery, but no one knew who he was. Jan then took his younger son, 5-year-old Piotrush, and went to his lover. Jan took the train. They got on the train and went to his lover, the one from Chorzów, from when he still worked at the battery steelworks. She wasn't at home, the door was locked, so he went to a nearby bar. He ordered something for the child to eat. He also ate something himself, and this time he decided to find out if Piotrush knew anything about his mother's death. He asked him if he knew what happened to his mom. Piotrush, only 5 years old but also clever, said that he knew because his mom fell down, because his dad shot her. Well, in this way, Piotrush also sentenced himself to death. Jan bought him some chocolate, then took him by the hand and led him to a nearby gravel pit. He knew the area well because he worked there. It was not far from the Kleofant mine. Then he put Piotrush down on the ground because he had been carrying him in his arms, turned him around so his back was facing him, and shot him in the back near the heart. The child, of course, died on the spot. He dug a hole in the gravel, threw Piotrush's body in there, and simply went to his lover. After he shot his second son, he returned to Warzeńczyce. As you remember, he still had 2-year-old Marisha. It was probably for the best because the mother-in-law didn't want to give her back. She said the child was still too young and he wouldn't take care of her. So she wouldn't give Marisha back to him. He left Wawrzęcice, then disappeared, traveled around. He was in different parts of Poland, among other places in Jarów. Then Jan followed the trail, this time with the police following the trail of his crimes. He remembered everything exactly, he described everything in detail. He showed the place where he shot his wife Michalina, but the body wasn't there. Well, probably it's the forest. Probably wild animals just tore her apart. He also showed the place where he shot and buried Dionysi. Dionysi's body couldn't be found either. Although, as you remember, he was buried in the local cemetery. But the information about the location of the body was so vague that it was impossible to search such a huge area of the cemetery. That body was not found either. However, the body of his mother, Maria, was found in the park. She had these earrings with her. They were quite distinctive. Earrings shaped like little horseshoes. She actually had 3 pairs of those earrings. She had 1 pair with her, sold the second, and gave the third to her daughter. The daughter showed that she has those exact earrings. Yes, it was exactly the same pair. There was no doubt that it was Maria. So in this way, the nameless grave of the Polish woman in Kosinowo was finally identified by name. They also weren't able to find Piotrus's body. Well, it's assumed that the gravel was simply taken somewhere, loaded onto a truck, and the body was taken away. So in all of this, only a few of his victims could be buried with dignity. On June 17, 1955, the court in Wrocław delivers its verdict. It's the death penalty. But it turns out that an amnesty has been declared. In this situation, Jan's death sentence was commuted to 15 years. And even so, he didn't serve that time. He was released from prison in 1968 at just 50 years old. There are still 2 things left in this story. Jan came to pick up Marisha. Why did he come for her? Maybe he wanted to have Marisha by his side. Maybe he was so calculating that he just wanted her to take care of him when he got old. But it seems that he's an unpredictable man. You can't rule out that at some point he might have told her, even in some drunken haze, what he did to Mom, what he did to Grandma, what he did to her brothers. So Marisha's life could certainly have been or even was in danger. And secondly, Marisha survived, so to speak, in this situation. Today, if she's still alive, she's 81 years old. I think the residents of Wawrzęcice know very well who she is, whether she stayed or left. I simply don't know that. But it's not out of the question that she's still somewhere in the area. And one more thing. This is the woman who was on the bus with the children. The one who told us everything. Who could this woman have been? The police never found her, but we can also guess that it could have been Jan's lover, who, simply afraid that he would kill her sooner or later, decided to tell everything. She probably didn't know how to do it either. She knew where he was from, she knew the last name of his in-laws, she got on the bus, and she told everything to the children, if it weren't for that woman who is unknown, who presumably is no longer alive today. Perhaps this story or the death of these people would never have been explained. This is one of those, I would say, local small stories. But you see, it was a huge tragedy at a time when everything that was happening in Poland was, in some way, extraordinary. That's all for this story from Wawrzęcice. Of course, subscribe to our channel, and as always, take care.
We warmly welcome the new supporters of our criminal patrol, Dorota Pospieszalska, Maciej Nowicki and Jakub. At the highest tiers, we are constantly supported by Mona Monika, Anna Maria Karka, Kinga Struska, Wira, Dorota Kowalówka, Dawid Grobecki, Bartosz Dzięciak, and Jarosław Jarociński. It's thanks to your support that we can create new videos. If you want to join our group of patrons, support us by clicking the link in the description below the video.